The sky tore open like a warning, lightning ripping across the heavens as the plane buckled mid-air. Oxygen masks dropped like puppets, screams rising above the howl of the wind. In first class, a woman in stilettos clutched her leather handbag like it could buy her safety. Her breath came shallow, her lipstick-perfect mouth muttering boardroom prayers. Across the aisle, a man with a sun-creased face gripped the seat beside him, shielding a child not his own. His jaw set, eyes narrowed not with panic, but readiness. When the crash came, it was violent and final. Silence followed. She awoke gasping, the taste of salt and blood on her tongue. Her designer suit shredded, heels gone, the surf whispering ruin. Next to her, the man groaned. Alive, a question rose in her throat. Absurd, fragile, real. If we can't go back, must I marry you? And just like that, survival began. Victoria's instinct was to reach for what she understood control. Even as the waves threatened to erase the memory of the crash, she clung to her waterlogged phone, shaking it with the same determination she used to push billion-dollar deals across the finish line. Her voice, though choked with cold, still carried the echo of boardroom certainty as she insisted the Coast Guard would find them, that her company had resources, that helicopters must already be in the air. Marcus didn't answer her. He scanned the shoreline, noting tide lines and debris, the absence of footprints, the position of the sun. She saw nothing but wreckage. He saw survival. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to argue. He just said they needed shelter before nightfall, fire, water, food, in that order. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It sounded brittle, uncertain. She was still clinging to the idea that someone would show up, that this was just a brief inconvenience before she could return to meetings and meetings about meetings. Marcus was already collecting driftwood. Hypothermia didn't care about optimism. Their first argument wasn't loud. She had defaulted to leadership, listing credentials, crisis scenarios she'd handled, systems she'd managed. He interrupted with the quiet authority of someone who'd survived things no memo could outline. This isn't a merger, he told her. There's no team to delegate to, no assistant to fetch supplies. There's only the work and the choice to live or not. She didn't like being dismissed, but she also couldn't ignore how he moved through the wreckage with quiet precision. She watched him strip bark, snap branches with his hands, twist fibers into something that might become rope. Her own designer. Shoes, beautiful and useless, sank into the sand with every step. When she tripped over coral and sliced open her heel, the blood stunned her. It was too red, too real. Marcus dropped everything to help, tearing cloth from his shirt to bandage her foot without asking, without complaint. His hands were rough, but his touch was gentle, and for the first time since waking up on the beach, she felt something other than panic. She thanked him, and the words tasted strange, like a foreign language she hadn't spoken in years. By the third day, she had stopped pretending. The sun dictated everything now, when they worked, when they ate, when they collapsed from exhaustion. Marcus built a lean-to from bamboo and fronds with a kind of instinct she couldn't understand. He explained as he worked, but never expected her to keep up. Still, she tried. She learned the difference between wood that was dead and wood that would burn. Her soft hands blistered, peeled, bled. At first she hid them behind her back, embarrassed by the weakness, but Marcus noticed. He always noticed. He showed her how. To protect her palms with torn cloth, how to carry with her arms, not her fingers. It wasn't pity. It was quiet teaching. When they made fire together, her steadying the drill while his tired arms turned it, something sparked beyond the flame. She laughed when the ember caught, not the polished laugh she used at investor dinners, but something raw and accidental. She told him it was her proudest moment since her first hostile takeover, then looked away, half ashamed. But Marcus smiled like he understood. Their first meal was of fish, Marcus speared in the shallows, barely cooked, half raw, but she ate every bite like it mattered, because it did. That night, a storm hit without warning. The palm-thatched roof gave up after minutes, soaking them completely. Lightning cracked above, and for the first time in her life, Victoria pressed her back against another human, not for pleasure or protection, but to feel real, to know she still existed. Marcus sat calm, his breathing even, his body a wall between her and the dark. When he said they were okay, she almost believed him. And when she woke at dawn, somehow having slept through the rage of nature, she realized she felt safer next. To him on a soaked floor of leaves than she ever had in a penthouse bed with a steel security system. The island peeled layers off her like bark. There was no one to impress, no reason to pretend. She failed at everything at first, starting fires, weaving baskets, tying knots, but failure wasn't fatal here. And Marcus never made her feel small for trying. He just kept teaching, showing, adjusting. At night, they talked by the fire. He told her about Afghanistan, about days waiting for rescue with wounded soldiers and too little hope. He called their current situation an inconvenience, and she didn't laugh, because she could see the weight behind his eyes. He told her about his daughter Emma, 7 years old and wiser than most adults. Her mother had died, breast cancer, and Marcus hadn't known how to go on until he looked into Emma's eyes and realized he didn't have a choice. Victoria told him about being raised for power, about her father's empire and her mother's expectations. She told him about James, the betrayal, the coldness that followed. She said she didn't even know if she existed beyond her job title. She didn't cry, but her voice broke in places. And Marcus said, simply, "I see you." It hit harder than any romantic line could. She'd been surrounded by admiration, status, control, and yet never seen. Not really. Not like this. They sat in silence after that, watching sparks rise into the dark. She wasn't planning anymore. She wasn't solving. She was just breathing. On the 10th day, the storm came with vengeance. Marcus had seen the signs hours before: clouds too low, birds vanishing into the trees, pressure that made his old scars ache. He did what he could, reinforcing the shelter with more bamboo, tightening lashings, building a drainage trench around their camp, but it wasn't enough. When the wind arrived, it howled like something alive. Their shelter gave way in seconds, torn apart by the storm like paper in a fist. Victoria screamed as debris ripped past them. A branch caught her leg, slicing deep. Blood soaked the sand as Marcus pulled her up, half carrying her through the torrent toward the only backup plan he had: a small rock hollow he'd noticed days ago but hoped they'd never need. It barely held the two of them, and as the ocean surged higher, as waves flooded their destroyed camp, they sat shivering in the dark, soaked, her teeth chattering, his arm around her shoulders like a rope anchoring them to something solid. By morning, the sky had calmed, but the wreckage was absolute. Their supplies were scattered or ruined, their fire pit lost to the sea. Victoria's leg was swollen, the cut angry and red in the humid heat. She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Fever followed. Her skin flushed, her breathing shallow. She muttered nonsense, names Marcus didn't recognize, fragments of arguments she must have had long ago. He recognized the signs of infection, and he knew what it meant. Doing nothing wasn't an option. He left her with the last of their clean water, wrapped in what dry cloth he could salvage, and headed for the jungle. There was no path, no machete, just memory and desperation. He remembered the plants the locals in Kandahar used to treat wounds, and he searched for their cousins here. Hours passed. His hands bled from vines, his clothes torn by underbrush. He was ready to come back empty when he caught the scent, sharp, bitter, earthy, and saw the leaves. He crushed them with stones into a thick green pulp, hoping memory hadn't failed him. When he returned, she was worse. Her skin was hot, lips dry, muttering again. He cleaned the wound with seawater, and she screamed, too weak to fight, too lucid to ignore the pain. He applied the poultice, bound it with what remained of his shirt, and held her through the night, whispering promises, telling her stories about Emma, about the first time she swam, about the way she always asked questions too big for her age. When morning came, so did it change. Her fever broke. Her eyes cleared. She whispered, barely audible, that he'd saved her. He corrected her, said they'd saved each other. And she didn't argue. Healing was slow, and slow meant honest. He helped her move, clean herself, relearn balance. She hated being weak, but Marcus made it bearable. Not easy, never easy, but survivable. She started to notice things. The way his eyes scanned the horizon every morning. The way he always gave her the larger portion of food, even when he was starving. How he touched her only when necessary, and never with hesitation. She caught him staring once, not at her body, but at her hands now covered in cuts and calluses. They were no longer soft, no longer corporate. She looked down and realized he wasn't admiring the damage. He was seeing her becoming something new. 3 weeks after the crash, she speared her first fish. It was clumsy, awkward, and entirely accidental, but when she held it up, grinning like a child, Marcus whooped like they'd won the lottery. He kissed her, not like a confession, but like instinct. She froze, then leaned in, kissing him back like she hadn't known she'd needed permission to want someone. Not just for safety, not for power, but for the simple, beautiful reality of being human together. When they pulled apart, she laughed breathless, bright, almost disbelieving. She said HR would have some thoughts about that. He grinned and decided R had no jurisdiction here. That night, while cleaning fish, she taught him about leveraged buyouts and mergers, comparing hostile takeovers to war tactics. He told her how to find true north by reading the stars, how to judge distance by the sound of surf. They were learning each other's languages, not just words but philosophies, hers of structure and ambition, his of survival and grit. The island became more than a battleground. It became a classroom, a confessional, a proving ground. Each day stripped more layers. She cried once, not from pain, but from the weight of seeing herself clearly for the first time. She told him she'd spent years building walls, building empires, making people fear her competence and respect her name. But nobody had ever made her feel safe. Until now, until this place, until him. He told her he'd buried most of his feelings in order to keep going, for Emma, for dignity, for survival. But now with her, the walls didn't feel necessary. Vulnerability wasn't weakness here. It was the only currency that mattered. And then everything changed again. The stream near their camp was growing too salty, too unreliable, Marcus decided. They needed to find the spring he'd seen higher up the cliffs. Victoria wanted to come, insisted even, but he could still see the stiffness in her walk. He promised to return before sunset, kissed her forehead in a gesture that had become familiar, and left. The climb was harder than he expected. The rocks brittle, the ledges narrow. Halfway up, the cliff face crumbled beneath his foot. He fell just 10 feet, but it was enough. His ankle twisted in the crack between rocks, and something snapped. The pain was blinding. He tried everything, his belt, nearby sticks, anything to wedge himself free, but he was stuck. Hours passed. The sun moved, time blurred. And then he heard her calling his name. She had climbed. Despite her injury, despite the risk. She'd found him, covered in sweat and dirt and pain, and the look on her face wasn't just fear. It was something fiercer. She didn't panic. She asked what he needed, listened, made a plan. She found a branch to use as a lever, tied vines into a makeshift rope the way he'd taught her. She freed his leg with strength he hadn't known she had. It hurt like hell. But her voice kept him conscious, soft, focused, unrelenting. They made it back down together, stumbling, falling, bleeding. When they reached the beach, both collapsed, too tired to speak. His ankle was clearly broken, swelling with every heartbeat. He told her she could have died climbing up there. She said he would have died if she hadn't. Then she kissed him again. Hard, desperate, no questions. And this time, when she said, "I love you," it didn't sound like an emergency. It sounded like truth. The morning after the fall, they built the signal fire together. Marcus couldn't stand, so Victoria followed his instructions, stacking driftwood and palm fronds, lining the base with dry kindling, surrounding it with stones to guard the flame from wind. She added green leaves and wet branches to create thick smoke, watching it rise with the kind of focus she once reserved for stock performance graphs. The sky stayed clear. The ocean was calm. And then, just past noon, a dark speck appeared on the horizon, too small to be a rescue ship, too steady to be a cloud. As it moved closer, its shape became clear. A fishing vessel. Victoria screamed, waving Marcus's shirt like a flag. She fed the fire again, higher, darker, more frantic. She ran back and forth along the beach until her lungs burned. The boat changed course. When it reached them, she collapsed in the sand, crying with a force that felt like release, not despair. Marcus watched her, silent and grateful. They'd survived. 43 days. He'd kept count with notches in a piece of bamboo. The fishermen spoke only a little English, but that didn't matter. They gave them blankets, water, soft food. That tasted too rich after weeks of coconut and fish. The ride back to civilization took nearly a full day. Victoria didn't let go of Marcus's hand once. It wasn't romance. It was something older, more primal. The kind of connection born from building something real, together, from nothing. The hospital in Panama City was jarring. White walls, beeping monitors, sharp, sterile air. Victoria's assistant sobbed on the phone, told her the company had planned a memorial service for the following week. Marcus called his sister, but he couldn't speak when he heard Emma's voice. He handed the phone to a nurse and cried into his hands, the way soldiers only do when no one's looking. Their survival became news, the photos, the interviews, the miracle headlines. But when the cameras left and the hospital released them, they stood in the lobby like strangers. She had a car to New York. He had a flight to Boston. It felt like the island had been a parenthesis, a pause in their real lives, a suspended moment. Could anything survive outside of it? Victoria said it out loud first, that it was crazy. That they had nothing in common except almost dying. Marcus disagreed. He said they had everything in common that mattered. And when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. She studied their fingers, his scarred and dark, hers pale and healing, and whispered that his daughter would probably hate her. He said she'd learn. She said his world might bore her. He said his world would ground her. She said they'd fail. He said maybe. But they had survived a plane crash. 6 weeks on a deserted island. And he liked their odds. She kissed him in the middle of the lobby. In front of the press, the nurses, the polished floor, and fluorescent lights. It tasted like something beginning. They went their separate ways, but not like before. They promised to meet again in a week, 7 days, to decide if what they had was island fever or something real. New York swallowed Victoria whole. Board meetings, reporters, lawyers, shareholders. Her penthouse felt like a museum, expensive, curated, lifeless. She stood in her closet, surrounded by designer shoes and suits, and none of them felt like hers anymore. At her first board meeting, the same old voices argued over profits and market shares. Harold Steinberg pitched an aggressive acquisition that would cost hundreds of jobs but inflate their numbers. 6 weeks ago, she would have backed him. This time, she didn't. She suggested partnership instead, collaboration, a new way of doing things. The room went still. Harold objected. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. After the meeting, she checked her phone. Marcus had sent pictures, Emma holding a crayon sign that read, "Welcome home, Daddy." A video of the two of them at an aquarium. Emma explaining the intelligence of octopi with the authority of a future marine biologist. One last message. She wants to meet the lady who helped Daddy come home. Victoria cried at her desk. In Boston, Marcus returned to his job. The same construction site, the same small apartment. But everything was different. Emma clung to him like a shadow. His sister asked 1,000 questions. She'd seen the news. She knew who Victoria was. She told Marcus that woman wasn't his type. He said he didn't have a type anymore. He had Victoria. Emma wanted to know if she was pretty. He said yes. She asked if she liked fish. He laughed and said she was complicated about fish. Emma decided she wanted to meet her. 3 days later, Victoria called him at midnight. She said her bed was too soft, that she'd tried sleeping on the floor, but it wasn't the same. She said she'd suggested reducing executive bonuses to invest in worker safety protocols, and the board looked at her like she was crazy. Said she didn't know how to do normal. She said she might break his heart. He said she wouldn't be the first to try, and he probably wouldn't notice because he already missed her. She told him she'd made a ring, not for him, for herself. From salvaged aluminum from the plane wreckage, a reminder that she'd survived, that she was different now, that she wanted to stay that way. He told her to come to Boston, meet Emma, see his life. The next morning, she did. She showed up at his apartment holding an octopus plush toy and wearing the wrong shoes. Emma opened the door and gave her a once-over like a 7-year-old scientist observing an alien species. She informed Victoria that Boston had different rules, that her shoes were not appropriate, that she would need boots or sneakers. Marcus watched from the doorway, smiling. The apartment was small, cluttered with Emma's art. Photos of Sarah, Emma's mother, still hung on the walls. Victoria felt like she was stepping into someone else's world, too glossy, too clean, too outside. But Emma took her hand and led her to the kitchen table covered in science books. Asked her if she'd seen any cephalopods. And Victoria, who barely knew what that word meant, nodded and said yes. Small ones. In tide pools. And for the next hour, she was quizzed, corrected, educated, and something in her softened with each question. That night, Emma fell asleep against her shoulder watching a documentary. Marcus carried her to bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and when he stepped onto the balcony with Victoria, he told her this was who he was. This apartment, this life, this daughter who needed someone who wouldn't leave. Victoria nodded, terrified and certain at the same time. She told him he needed to see who she was too. Not the island version, the real one. So he did. The next day, Marcus and Emma came to New York. Emma stared at the penthouse with wide eyes. Said it was bigger than their whole building. Victoria knelt to her level and said, "But your home has something mine doesn't. Life." Emma nodded. Said she could make some drawings for the walls. She made good ones. The next day, Victoria walked into her boardroom with Marcus and Emma in tow. She destroyed Harold's proposal with precision, outlined a better plan in real time, reminded the room why she was the youngest CEO in company. History. Afterward, in the elevator, Marcus looked at her differently, not distantly, not fearfully, but fully. Said watching her was like seeing someone spear their first fish. Except the fish were corporations. Later, they took Emma to the Natural History Museum. Walked hand in hand, watched their reflection in the glass. They didn't match, but they made sense. That night, Victoria stood on the terrace and told Marcus she was ready to sell the penthouse. Move to Boston. He stopped her. Told her she didn't have to give up who she was, that they'd find the middle ground. Build it piece by piece, just like they built the shelter. She traced the scar on his hand. Asked if he really thought they could make it work. CEO and construction worker. Boardrooms. and work boots. He said they'd already done the impossible. They survived. Everything else was just details. 6 months later, Victoria's office had changed. Same glass, same skyline, but now Emma's drawings lived between her accolades. A framed photo of the island sat beside her MBA, both testaments to survival. Sterling Industries had evolved 2 more people-focused, less predatory. Common sense, she called it, hard-earned. Marcus ran a small but growing company that built homes meant to last, storm-proofed by experience. Emma lived between them, her weekends split between science fairs and star charts, laughter and learning. They didn't tell their story to cameras. It belonged to the tide. To the fire pit they returned to, 1 year later, with promises instead of panic. Emma officiated, barefoot and beaming, while her parents exchanged vows beneath the stars that once watched them suffer. And when Victoria asked the question again, it was no longer delirium, it was choice. If we can't go back, must I marry you? Always, always yes.